Hello and welcome to this week's Riks Round Up by Riks Europe. My name is Rebecca, and in the panel today, as always, Peter Kleppe and Elias Norgren. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So today we'll be talking about Syria, the collapse of the French government, and environmental NGOs. So we'll get into exactly what that means, but I think we'll start by touching on the Syria subject. Elias, can you tell people exactly what's going on?
Well, last weekend, jihadi rebels entered Damascus, and the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad had to escape with his family and is now apparently landed in Russia, where he will be granted asylum. Now, this is a major geopolitical development because the Syrian civil war has been going on since 2011, and this sort of took the world by shock almost, because this offensive by the rebel forces appears to have started around 2 weeks ago. And they, I believe last week, they entered the city of Homs, which has been held by the Assad government for quite some time now. It's Syria's third largest city. And this weekend they entered Damascus. So this was a very swift offensive that they enrolled on. And it seems that the forces of the Assad government were just crumbling and had no real morale to fight. And this is probably contrary to what people were really expecting out of this conflict. We haven't really heard much about the Syrian civil war lately. And it's generally because it's been at some sort of a stalemate or standstill. And I think a lot of people overestimated, actually, the strength of Bashar al-Assad's forces in this particular context. I'm reminded, actually, about how Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy, was open to recognizing Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria, because this is a government that the West at large has been at war with, indirectly at least. Recognizing Bashar al-Assad's government would enable the EU to send Syrian migrants back there. However, that's no longer on the table, obviously, as the government was toppled. So this leaves a lot of open questions about what the future of the region.
Peter, what do you believe could be the consequences of this?
Well, I think apart from, of course, the big question marks of what's going to happen now in Syria, whether the jihadis will be as evil as some people think they will be, specifically towards the minorities, the Christians, the Kurds. There's, of course, a question what the repercussions will be for European refugee policies, because many Syrians have been granted asylum here in Europe. And I think up to 10 European countries are now freezing asylum processing for Syrians, also because it's not entirely clear how safe Syria is at the moment. But also, importantly, countries like Belgium will reconsider whether people that have been granted asylum during the last 5 years when they come from Syria, whether they will be able to stay. I think this is only fair. If you only have a limited number of spots to provide shelter to people that are on the run, I think it only makes sense that people that are no longer in danger that are being sent back. Of course, many of these people will have been integrated well, so this will not always be easy to do. And I'm sure our politicians will decide when people are very well integrated that there's a case to, just allow them to stay. I think we all know in practice not many people are actually sent back. But it's interesting to see the paradigm shift, especially in Western Europe, where this is seen as completely normal. Whereas in the past it would be seen as some kind of an extremist view that if you are no longer in danger, that you also can no longer enjoy the asylum privilege.
So moving on to environmental NGOs, Peter, could you tell the audience, first of all, NGOs, perhaps not everybody knows what this means, but I understand that they will no longer be funding the environmental NGOs.
Well, NGOs stands for non-governmental organizations. So you would expect that if you are a non-governmental organization, that you're also not financed by the government. But that's not exactly how it works here in Brussels at the EU level, because the European Commission throws fortunes and mountains of cash to nominal NGOs that are basically fake NGOs because they're hopelessly financially dependent on taxpayers' money from the European Union. This is deeply problematic because if you think about it a bit more profoundly, it means that a bureaucracy, a supranational bureaucracy, funds a charity, claiming that this charity is really representing civil society, whereas financially, so in effect operationally, it is completely dependent of that bureaucracy. So when you have the European Commission then trying to justify its policies by saying, look, I mean, 3 out of the 5 NGOs we consulted say X, Y, Z, then, you know, this, you can see that this is actually having an important consequence on policy, and it's deeply troubling that you know that these NGOs are really an extension of the bureaucracy that is seeking their advice. Now, what is changing, and this is also groundbreaking, I think, the European Commission has told that for a specific environmental you know subsidy fund. If you get money from that fund, you can no longer lobby the European Commission. This is complete common sense, but of course, the NGOs that are profiting from it, they are very angry about this. They're all up in arms. But at least it's hopeful that we finally see a change here.
Elias, why do you think that we're seeing this change now?
Well, I think that there's some people have probably opened their eyes to the corruption that goes on in the EU. And for example, in Sweden, we're not really used to this level of lobbying and this sort of organization of political. It's not corruption really, but it sort of borders on corruption in many cases. This is at least how it would be viewed in Sweden, to have all these types of organizations, typically left-wing, forwarding left-wing topics in particular. Receiving all of this money from public funds, and then which are then used to lobby the public, for example. So as Peter pointed out, these are not really non-governmental entities or organizations in that sense, obviously. They're using this name, this general term, to sort of get away with what they're doing. And this has been sort of manufacturing political opinions from the European Union. And I'm very happy to see that this might be coming to an end in at least in this particular area regarding the climate lobbying. This is, of course, also one of the areas that the EU is probably reconsidering its past stances on, considering the damage economically that the climate policies have done to the EU at large, but also in particular in countries like in Germany, where it has hampered completely the motor industry, for example. So I think this is part of the just the general direction that things seems to be heading in, that the EU does not want to be spending money on things that just doesn't benefit the continued existence of the EU or Europe at large. However, slowly that's moving, but I think this is something of an indication, at least, that things are moving in the proper direction.
And moving on to the collapse of the French government, Peter, what will happen in French politics?
Nobody really knows. So what happened is that Emmanuel Macron, he did not have a majority in parliament in June of this year. Therefore, he called new parliamentary elections, hoping that his party would do well. That was not the case. His party did very bad, and his majority was even, or his lack of majority was even more problematic. Long story short, we had the Olympics in France. They lost a lot of time. In the end, Michel Barnier, a center-right politician, was appointed prime minister, relying on a majority that was effectively dependent on the right-wing populist National Rally of Marine Le Pen. Barnier and Macron were hoping that Le Pen would support Barnier for at least a bit, but she already pulled the plug after 3 months. She then voted with some left-wing motion to torpedo the government of Barnier. One of the reasons may be that the prosecutor in France is asking that the political rights of Marine Le Pen are suspended for 5 years, her right to run for election, because of some scandal with European Parliament staffers from her party being employed in Paris which is illegal. You can only use a European Parliament staffer for work in the European Parliament. Now, it must be said, in many countries, in practice, people don't really care about this, but in France, it's rightly prosecuted, I think. Then another question is, should you then deprive somebody as important from her, of her political rights for 5 years? And one of the people that is now running to become, or is in the running to become French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, he's a centrist politician. He has said that this is unacceptable in a democracy, that you would sort of take the right to run for election for 5 years. And this may actually help him to gain the trust of Marine Le Pen. So what Macron is now basically trying to do is to say, look, let's try to find somebody else that Le Pen trusts, because she's now the kingmaker in French politics. Now, in any case, Macron cannot call another parliamentary election until June 2025. And people believe that ultimately he will have to call a parliamentary election. And then if he loses that one badly, there's even a chance he will have to step down as president. Normally he's president until 2027. So that's perhaps the long game that Le Pen is aiming for, trying to, politically complicate Macron so much that he's forced to call presidential elections so she can run.
And Elias, do you think that courts or the justice system should be allowed to be involved or help decide who can or can't run in the elections?
Well, I think this has been something more of a. It's been used. It's used as a political tool in this particular sense. Not that I'm not agreeing that you should prosecute these types of crimes, essentially, that Marine Le Pen and her staffers have been presumably guilty of. But this comes just very. It's very useful for, of course, the established parties, the political establishment of France in general, that Marine Le Pen is now facing prosecution over these things. But I do think that this is. I think also the general the crisis in the National Assembly with regards to the fall of the government just speaks to the lack of reflection, actually, that the election results had on what the people of France actually think. Let's not forget that the National Rally was the largest party by shares of votes, but was only the third largest party in shares of candidates for the National Assembly. I think that there's a lot of things brewing underneath the surface in France, and we're probably going to see a lot of things being redrawn essentially from scratch. We've seen electoral reforms in France before, when it has become overly abundantly clear that the political landscape does not really reflect what the people actually want. And I think this is probably the beginning of something like that as Peter pointed out, that National Rally is probably going to try to make things very difficult for Macron and his party, and obviously also the left-wing opposition, to sort of push these changes through by, for example, forcing an early presidential election.
And if I may just add, there's one thing we didn't discuss is, of course, the fact that France is in deep financial trouble, like many other European welfare states. But specifically, France is losing some of the trust of investors. The borrowing cost of France is equal to the borrowing costs of Greece. Now, Greece has made a lot of progress lately, and we all know that ultimately the European Central Bank can just print money to bail out the French government once again at the expense of savers. But of course, that's going to make the country with a lot of savers, in particular Germany and the Netherlands, pretty angry, which is undermining the unity in the Eurozone. So yeah, this is part of a bigger, more profound financial problem. And add to that the economic crisis that we now have in Europe, the deindustrialization of Germany, which is now widely acknowledged. It used to be some kind of, let's say, an exaggeration if you were talking about deindustrialization, but now the European employers are saying the same, that this is a big danger, the chemical industry is in big trouble, and this is all largely due to climate and environmental policies pursued by the EU. So I mean, yeah, you're looking at a pretty big crisis, and France is only the manifestation of that, I think.
Thank you, Peter Kleppe and Elias Norgren, for your insights.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.